Good morning, developers. If you are new to the channel, my name is Rob, and it is Algorithm Monday, the day that we do a code challenge algorithm, something to stay sharp as developers. And today is a JavaScript promise-related one. I'm calling it the case for .race. I thought it was clever. But the goal here is to use promises in a clever way. I'm going to use the race method. It took me a while to figure out a use case for it. You can obviously use any method you want, but treat this as an interview question. You need to use promises. You are going to make a fetch request to an API, and I will provide a link in the URL. I'll show you that here in a minute when we sit down and code. But you will wait for a maximum of 5 seconds, and so there are 3 use cases to handle. 1, a good fetch, that means you got the data back. 2, a failed fetch, meaning for some reason the fetch was bad. The URL was wrong, it was a bad response, something like that. Or it simply took too long, meaning it was 5 seconds or longer. Alert the user if it took too long, right? The server is overwhelmed. We made a request, it's taking too long, try back later. If you get a good fetch, alert the user, and then the failed fetch would just be kind of a generic one. Okay, so give this a try. Again, use promises. I'll meet you back here in just a second, and we'll do some pseudocode quick. There are a zillion ways to do it. The way that I am going to do it is I'm going to make a variable called P1, and I'm going to use the fetch API, and we will go to our URL. The fetch API returns a promise, so we don't need to do anything else. That right there is enough. We'll have a promise 2, which will be a new promise, and this thing, it's going to have resolve and reject. Remember, this is just pseudocode, not perfect. But inside here, we will have our setTimeout. And this thing's also going to have a function. And inside of our function, we are going to reject, open close, after 5 seconds. Okay, so we've got 2 promises. The one from the fetch API, that's going to it's either going to come back with good fetch, we got something back, or a failed fetch, which will be its own reject. And then we've got our promise 2, which is going to automatically reject after 5 seconds. Down below here, we will grab the promise constructor. So it's going to be promise. Again, I'm going to use .race. Race is different than any. Any requires them all to fulfill. Race will take a fulfilled or a failed promise. Whatever happens first, it'll be the first one. So promise.race, we're going to hand it an array of P1 and P2 like so. Then we can chain off of this. We can do our .then, and that will be our good case, and we will have our .catch. That will be for our other 2 cases. Okay, let's go code it out. I'm over to VS Code. Naturally, use any code editor you're comfortable with. I've got a file called caseforrace.html, and this code will be in the description on GitHub. But I've got script tags. If you want to use Node, that's just fine. More people are familiar with HTML. So I'm inside the script tags here, and I'm going to make a const called fetchRec, and I'm going to use the fetch API. And this link that I dropped in here, that will be in the description as well. This is just a little Express server I have listening for GET requests at, again, this particular path. This is what it looks like. If I highlight that and refresh, that was instant. Refresh again. It's refreshing, and after 6 seconds, the data will come through. So there's a 50-50 chance it will take 6 seconds or pretty much be instant. So that fetch returns a promise. That already happens. So we've got a promise. Let's put that note here. A promise is in fetch rec. We'll do right below it here, const timeout promise equals new promise, open close. We're going to bring in resolve and reject, even though we don't need resolve. We're going to do setTimeout, open close. This callback will run, and we will simply reject. I'm going to put a message in there of timeout, and this is going to run after 5 seconds. So again, this one will either take no time, hopefully, or 6 seconds. And so let's come back up to the top here and let's make our notes. Cases to handle. 1, good data, or I'll put good, let's do good fetch/data. 2, bad fetch, and then 3, timeout. So we'll handle each one of those down here. I like to make a variable. I'm going to call it promises, and I will put our 2 promises in there. So we've got our fetch request 1, and then we've got our timeout promise 2. So those are our 2 promises. We can run race on this. So go to the promise constructor, call race, hand it our promises, and because we have some catches here, we're going to have to do a then. I'm also not at the top level, so I can't do a wait anyway. But for our then, we will expect the data, so R is just short for response, and I will console.log R, and let's throw up there an alert, data received. We don't have a UI, so there's no reason to there's no reason to do anything fancy here. We'll put a catch on the end here, and so this is going to handle the then. This part is going to handle a good fetch. The bad fetch and the timeout. Well, if R equals, it's going to be up here timeout. That means that one happened. So we can alert server took too long, try back later. Otherwise, that means we had a fetch error. So this thing did not succeed and we had a bad fetch. So I will put an alert here, bad fetch. Okay? That is everything that we need. Let's talk through it again here in just a second. Over to my file, case for race.html, refresh, and we pretty much got an instant response, data received, and down below this was our console.log. Refresh again, we hit it, refresh. Okay, looks like this one's going to time out. There we go, server took too long, try back later, okay. If I come back over here and I'm just gonna make this a bad URL and refresh, we get a bad fetch. So that was our other use case. The first one was a good fetch, the second one was our timeout, and then I changed this to a bad URL, which gave us a bad fetch. Those are our use cases. So let's talk through it again real quick. Line 8, we make our fetch, we give it a URL. It's a GET request, so we don't need to do anything fancy. We have a timeout here, which is a new promise. So these are both going to be promises. This callback, our promise, it is a set timeout. After 5 seconds, it's going to reject. So this promise will always reject after 5 seconds. This one, we don't know whether it's going to reject or fulfill. Down below here, line 15, put both of those promises into this array. So we have an iterable, which is what race takes. And I can make that note here, make an array of our two promises. Race takes an iterable and runs then or catch as soon as any promise settles. Settles means it resolved or it rejected. We got our promise.race, there we hand it. This is the then, so that means somebody resolved or somebody fulfilled, and we do our stuff. The catch here, this means someone rejected, and in that case, it's either going to be our timeout or it's going to be because fetch did. That is it. If you've got another solution or other suggestions, I would love to see them. Have a great one. I'll see you next time on Algorithm Monday.